Snow was falling in heavy flakes over the deserted streets of Lillehammer when the world's most feared team of assassins took their positions in the frozen shadows of that small Norwegian town. It was a Saturday in July 1973, and the thermometer read only 2 degrees above zero, an unusual cold for the Scandinavian summer that lent the operation a ghostly aura. The Mossad agents, accustomed to the stifling heat of the Middle East, breathed out vapor as they observed through binoculars the illuminated windows of a modest apartment on Fuchsgate Street. Their footsteps left deep marks in the virgin snow, prints that would become the first evidence of one of the greatest intelligence fiascos in modern history. At that moment, 6 of Israel's best operatives were convinced they had finally cornered Ali Hassan Salameh, the man known as the Red Prince, the architect of the massacre that stained the Munich Olympics in blood just 10 months earlier. The error about to be consummated on that freezing night had its roots firmly planted in the thirst for vengeance that had been corroding the heart of the State of Israel since that tragic September of 1972. When 11 Israeli athletes were killed in Munich by Palestinian terrorists from the Black September organization, Prime Minister Golda Meir had called a secret cabinet meeting and pronounced words that would echo through the dark corridors of international intelligence: kill them all. Thus was born Operation Wrath of God, a program of targeted assassinations that would transform the Mossad into a surgical and relentless killing machine. For months, the Israeli agency had demonstrated terrifying efficiency, eliminating targets in Rome, Paris, and Cyprus with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Each execution was carried out with a technical coldness that made rival intelligence services tremble with both admiration and terror. The Israeli agents moved through Europe like lethal ghosts, emerging from the shadows to deliver summary justice before disappearing again into the anonymity of major metropolises. Ali Hassan Salameh had become the personal obsession of Mike Harari, the legendary chief of Mossad operations, a man whose reputation for infallibility had been built over decades of spectacular successes. Salameh was not just another name on a hit list. He was the living symbol of the Munich humiliation, the man who had planned every detail of the operation that turned the Olympic celebration into a bloodbath televised to the entire world. Harari had studied every photograph of Salameh, memorized every scar on his face, and every trait of his distinct Arabic physiognomy. The Red Prince became a ghostly presence, haunting the veteran spy's dreams, an obsession that began to cloud his traditionally precise judgment. When a dubious intelligence source whispered that Salameh had been spotted in tiny Lillehammer, Harari did not hesitate to mobilize his most experienced team, including Sylvia Raphael, the seductive agent who had become a legend within the Mossad's own lore. The arrival of the Israeli team in Norway should have been an exercise in absolute discretion, but from the first moment, alarm bells should have rung in the trained minds of those professionals. Lillehammer was not Rome or Paris, where foreign spies could easily blend into cosmopolitan crowds. It was a town of only 20,000 inhabitants, where unknown faces were immediately noticed by local residents, and where foreigners stood out like ink stains on white fabric. The agents rented cars using fake passports that would withstand any superficial check, but left digital trails easily traceable by any serious investigation. They stayed in different hotels, following basic compartmentalization protocols, but their constant coming and going to the same target apartment began to draw the attention of curious neighbors who had too much time on their hands during the long twilight of the Nordic summer. The man they were watching was Ahmed Bouchikhi, a 28-year-old Moroccan waiter who worked at a municipal swimming pool and had moved to Norway in search of a better life. Bouchikhi was married to Toril Larsen, a kind, blonde Norwegian woman who was 8 months pregnant with the couple's first child. He spoke hesitant English, loved Western pop music, and had the innocent habit of greeting other Arabs he encountered in the small town, a gesture of solidarity among immigrants that would be fatally misinterpreted by the Israeli observers. To the Mossad agents, weary from months of hunting and pressured by the urgency for results, every casual encounter Bouchikhi had with other local Arabs seemed like confirmation that they were watching a terrorist cell in operation. Bouchikhi's dark beard, Arabic origin, and approximate height created a superficial resemblance to Ali Hassan Salameh in the minds of the spies that became an unshakable certainty. fueled by the desperate desire to finally capture their most coveted prey. For an entire week, the surveillance team meticulously documented every move Bouchikhi made, but at no point did they stop to question why an international terrorist would be leading such a mundane and exposed life. Bouchikhi rode his blue bicycle to work every day, bought food at the local market, and walked hand in hand with his pregnant wife through the city streets. There were no bodyguards, no security measures, no encrypted communications, or suspicious meetings. He was simply an ordinary man leading an ordinary life, but the Israeli agents, prisoners of their own expectations, interpreted this normalcy as sophisticated camouflage. They saw what they wanted to see, perceived patterns where only coincidence existed, and transformed evidence of Bouchikhi's innocence into proof of his guilt. The psychological pressure of months of failure in capturing Salameh had created a state of mind where the team desperately needed a success, and this need began to distort their perception of reality. On the night of July 21st, as Bouchikhi and his wife were returning from a movie theater where they had watched a romantic film, the couple walked slowly down Fuchsgate Street, talking softly about names for the baby due in a few weeks. The sound of their footsteps on the melting snow echoed in the empty streets of the small town, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm that masked the stealthy movements of the assassins positioning themselves in the shadows. Toril held her husband's arm, gently complaining about the weight of her advanced pregnancy, while Bouchikhi smiled and stroked her rounded belly. It was a scene of domestic intimacy that should have touched the heart of any human observer, but the Mossad agents saw only the target they had pursued for months, walking unprotected toward the execution they considered not only justified, but necessary to balance the blood accounts left by Munich. At 10:40 p.m., as the couple approached the entrance to their building, two agents emerged from the shadows with automatic pistols drawn. There was no ultimatum, no attempt at capture, no hesitation. The shots cut through the freezing night air like metallic thunder, 14 rounds that forever shattered the tranquility of that small town and the Mossad's reputation for infallibility. Bouchikhi collapsed onto the snow, which immediately stained red, while his wife screamed words in Norwegian that the assassins did not understand, but whose despair was universal. The agents fled to waiting cars with engines running, convinced they had finally delivered the justice Israel demanded, that the Red Prince was dead and that Munich had been avenged. It would take only a few hours for them to discover they had committed the most catastrophic error in the history of Israeli espionage. The Norwegian investigative machine, underestimated by the Israelis who considered it amateurish and slow, began to function with surprising efficiency in the very first hours after the murder. Neighbors had noted the license plate numbers of suspicious cars. Others had discreetly photographed the strangers who had been loitering in the neighborhood for days. The local police, used to handling minor crimes in a peaceful society, mobilized federal resources and turned the investigation into a war operation against terror. When two Mossad agents, Dan Erbel and Marianne Gladnikoff, arrived at Oslo Airport to return rented cars and board escape flights, they were met by police waiting for them with handcuffs and arrest warrants. The carefully planned escape network collapsed in a matter of hours, revealing the operational fragility of an organization that had become too arrogant for its own security protocols. Erbel's interrogation revealed the first major error in judgment of the entire operation. The agent, suffering from severe claustrophobia, could not withstand the pressure of confinement in a small, damp Norwegian prison cell and began to speak only 6 hours after his capture. His open, detailed, and desperate confessions surrendered not only the names of his teammates, but revealed the entire structure of the Mossad's European network. Each name mentioned led to other names. Each address revealed led to safe houses filled with incriminating evidence. Police discovered unencrypted phone lists, poorly hidden fake passports, detailed maps with Hebrew annotations, and an impressive amount of heavy weaponry. It was as if the most secret organization in the world had left an operations manual scattered across Scandinavia, waiting to be discovered by any moderately competent investigator. Sylvia Raphael, the most experienced and respected agent on the team, was captured 3 days later at a train station in Oslo. attempting to board an express for Stockholm using false documents she herself had considered unforgeable. Her arrest represented a devastating blow to Mossad morale, as Raphael was considered untouchable, a professional whose operational expertise had become legendary in international intelligence circles. Seeing her photograph on the front pages of European newspapers, handcuffed and dejected, was a humiliation that echoed through the corridors of headquarters in Tel Aviv like a funeral wail. Mike Harari managed to escape to Israel, but his career was ruined and his reputation destroyed forever. The man who had been considered the most brilliant operative of his generation became a pariah within his own organization, carrying the moral weight of having ordered the execution of an innocent man. The trial that followed turned into a media circus that exposed the Mossad's secret methods to the world and destroyed decades of careful work in building an image of supernatural competence. Witnesses paraded through Norwegian courts, reporting intimate details of Israeli operations, from surveillance techniques to secure communication procedures. The international press devoured every revelation with voracious appetite, turning the captured agents into involuntary celebrities whose photographs illustrated sensationalist headlines about espionage and incompetence. 6 Mossad agents were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 2 to 5 years, sentences that represented not only legal punishments but profound humiliations for people whose identities were built entirely around their ability to operate in the shadows without leaving a trace. While the tragedy of Lillehammer unfolded its devastating consequences for the Mossad, Ali Hassan Salameh remained alive and well protected in Beirut, likely laughing at the incompetence of the Israelis who had turned him into a national obsession. The real Red Prince would continue his terrorist activities for 6 more years, organizing attacks and bypassing Israeli security with an ease that must have been even more humiliating for the survivors of the Lillehammer operation. When Salameh was finally killed in a car bombing in Beirut in January 1979, his death came not as a result of a revenge operation for Bouchikhi's death, but as part of a completely different strategy that had nothing to do with the obsession that led to the Norwegian tragedy. Ahmed Bouchikhi was buried in a small cemetery in Lillehammer in a ceremony that brought together the local Arab immigrant community and several Norwegians who had been touched by the injustice of his death. His wife Toril gave birth to a daughter 3 weeks later, a child who would grow up never knowing her father and carrying the burden of being an orphan of one of the most misguided executions in modern history. The Israeli government, initially reluctant to admit any responsibility, was eventually forced to pay financial compensation to Bouchikhi's family, a late and insufficient recognition that it had committed not only an operational error, but a crime against basic humanity. The Lillehammer operation became a milestone in the history of the Mossad, but not for the reasons its planners had imagined. Instead of being remembered as a victory for Israeli justice, it turned into a case study of how the thirst for vengeance can corrupt even the most professional and well-trained organizations. The case began to be taught in intelligence academies around the world as an example of what happens when agents allow personal emotions or political pressures to replace the cold, methodological analysis that should guide life-or-death operations. The tragedy demonstrated that even experienced spies can succumb to groupthink, seeing evidence where none exists, and confirming suspicions based on prejudices and expectations rather than verifiable facts. The reforms implemented in the Mossad after Lillehammer were profound and long-lasting, ranging from identity verification protocols to secure communication procedures and escape techniques. The organization learned in the most painful way possible that operational arrogance can be as lethal as technical incompetence, and that overconfidence can turn elite professionals into dangerous amateurs. The price of that lesson was paid with the blood of an innocent man, whose only fault was vaguely resembling a man the Israelis wanted to kill, a man who was not even in the same country when the bullet found its wrong target on a frozen street in Norway.